Well, greetings, brethren. Happy Sabbath to all of you on this inaugural service of the Fulton Church of God. Not the first one we've had, but the first one we've had in this hall. So that's very exciting. Sort of a new beginning. As the world ends, there's a lot going on around us that is utterly insane. Today is Veterans Day. We're certainly grateful for all of those who've served in that way to try to protect the rest of us from harm. And certainly there are many threats that have faced the nation over the centuries. And in fact, originally this day was Armistice Day. It marked the end of World War I. It was supposed to be the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month that the guns of August would finally fall silent. Although they didn't fall silent right away, they still kept going through that day. But that was the day that was supposed to be the war to end all wars. But, they redrew the boundaries of the Middle East at that time. And as somebody wrote a book about that, it was called the Peace to End All Peace. And it kind of threw the things into chaos over time. Certainly in Europe, things didn't last. It wasn't very long, only a couple decades, and then war broke out again, World War. And as time goes on, here we face World War again. I mean, it could really happen to us in no time at all, that we could be plunged right back into something of that magnitude. And it would be worse. Probably than it even was before, which was horrific to think about. World War I is horrific to think about what people went through. In Britain, they call the Armistice Day, they changed it to Remembrance Day. And over there, Don was just showing me a guy, they wear their poppies in remembrance, and there was some older gentleman there wearing the poppy, and then they had this Islamist protester coming up to them and in their face and pushing each other, and it's going to get into a big fight there. There are gigantic protests, pro-Gazan protests going on in London right now. I mean, and they were moving to our embassy there, and it was absolutely unbelievable to see. But of course, we had it here last week and all through the week. We have people running through congressional offices saying, look out for those who are supporting the supposed genocide that Israel is committing against the Palestinians. And, it's amazing that the UN found they couldn't come up with a condemnation of Hamas, but they did come up with many rulings condemning Israel in what's happened. It's just utterly shocking. And, I was thinking about these things in the news, and I saw a news item this week that Mr. Barnett sent, which I found very interesting. And it said, here was the title. It said, "Neither Hamas nor Israel should rule Gaza in future, EU says." In other words, the European Union is saying, Gaza, here's what they said, "Gaza might become an international protectorate after the war," the EU has said, adding that neither Palestinian group Hamas nor Israel should ever rule there again. So, what an opportunity for European advisors and controllers to step in to kind of take over what's happening there. Scott Ashley actually wrote a note back about this. He sent this to a few of us, and I don't think he'd mind me sharing this. He said, "Could something like this be a precedent for a mandated international peacekeeping force to be in control of Jerusalem?" Put that in quotes. "We know we haven't seen the end of Arab attacks on Israelis nor of Israeli retaliation. Is this setting the stage for coming end-time events? For that matter, could we see a widespread Arab uprising throughout Israel and external attacks that could bring Israel to its knees? I wouldn't rule that out. While in Israel recently and before the Hamas attacks, some of the guides told us how Israel was being crippled by the internal division over judicial reform. This isn't covered by our U.S. media, but there have been widespread strikes, Air Force reservists refusing to fly, other reservists refusing to serve, massive weekly protests of more than 100,000 Israelis. The country came together instantly over the Hamas attacks, but Israeli society is deeply divided, much as here in the U.S. I have no doubt that Hamas took advantage of this internal division when deciding to strike as they did." Israeli society is in deep trouble long term, just as we are here. Both are very fragile, could crumble under greater pressure. And Britain has been a basket case far longer. It could hardly be called an Israelite nation any longer. Could these things bring about the fall of an Israelite nation within a moon, a new moon? It mentions that in Hosea 5:7. We don't know for sure, but it seems like within a month. And without direct outside attack. These things deserve much thought. He wasn't suggesting that the end is immediately upon us. He's aware there are some other things that need to fall into place. But I do hear it said by many that we could be right in the tribulation immediately, and some associate that with eclipses we're having. There's one, right before Passover of next year. But we can't go by that. We must go by what the Bible tells us. Though there could be unusual signs accompanying these things, we'll have to see. I do find it interesting that Hamas's attack, Israel's 9/11, so to speak, that was on October 7th, was the last day of God's holy day calendar. That was the 8th day, we'll call the last great day. And it came exactly 50 years after an attack on October 6th, 1973. So October 6th to October 7th, if you're in the evening, you're basically on the same lunar day, or solar day of the year, I guess. But it was 50 years apart from the attack on Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur War that happened 50 years before. I don't think that's coincidental. I think we've got an item about that this time where it's basically saying because Satan hates God's holy days, because it exemplifies the plan of God, and I'm sure that's true. He's going to do whatever he can to wreck that. But of course, God is allowing these things, I think, also to fall on these days because they're significant, and they're to point us to a reminder of things that we need to be reminded of. But what about the idea that, we were talking about this last week when the end could come immediately. I was talking with Mr. Smith a little bit about that. And I'm going to ask the question, could the Great Tribulation start immediately? And what should we do as we face these worsening times? And I'm simply titled it, Could the Tribulation Start Tomorrow? Now, a lot of people think that. There's a lot of people in the world think, well, Jesus Christ could return tomorrow. We know that's not true. We all know there's got to be things in front of that. And that includes the tribulation period. But then we might think, well, maybe the tribulation could start tomorrow. But that's not really so either, because there's another number of things that have to happen before that. I gave a series a long while back on discerning the signs of the times. I showed why we are in the end times, that it cannot be 5 years or 500 years, as some people say. Yet I also showed that Christ can't return tomorrow and that the tribulation can't start tomorrow either. And we've got these 3.5 years before his return would fit that time frame. Now, I gave a series in going through that and showing that a number of things had to happen first. And we should be watching for these things. But some of the things I noted earlier are much further along today. So some we're still waiting for. I want to run through some of those quickly in terms of catching up. I'm going to focus on a couple areas in terms of the Middle East situation. So one thing I said is to mention a further decline of modern Israel. And we read about that in the blessings and curses in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. Now, there's a lot of bad things that are mentioned that's going to happen there. I was just sent a news story from Zero Hedge, and the article is titled, "Have you lost count yet of the number of things in our country that are broken?" And it lists out a number of things. It says the justice system, public safety, education, medicine, money, transportation, housing, the food supply, the border, the news business, the arts, our relations with other countries. That's just the big institutional stuff. At the personal scale, it's an overwhelming plunge in living standards, loss of incomes, careers, chattels, liberties, poor health, especially mental health, and failing confidence in any plausible future. We are in trouble. Our society is spiraling downhill fast. But I do want to note that if you will read through Leviticus 26, you're going to see it is actually going to even get worse. There's going to be people that are utterly starving throughout the nation. We're going to see famine on a scale we haven't seen. We're going to see drought on a scale we haven't seen. We've seen it a lot in the West. The West has had a lot of drought. Now, they had some rains recently that were helpful, but we're going to see that throughout the country. And we haven't seen that, but we will. And it's going to get worse and worse, more than it has. But this is being aided along by all of the human decisions that are being made, not just the general immorality. But I think the general immorality leads to those bad decisions. Another thing I pointed out, that was number one. Number two is an Arab confederation allied with Germany, which you read about in Psalm 83. And I don't want us to go there, but I'm just going to mention that you see all these basically Middle Eastern countries and Muslim powers, and it mentions Edom, and it mentions Ishmael, it mentions all these forces, which would probably involve the Turks and the Egyptians and the people of Saudi Arabia and all of these other forces arrayed against Israel. And by the way, we just saw a big meeting of them where Erdogan is leading the meeting and saying that Hamas is defending their homeland. And they're talking about going and helping them against Israel. I mean, this is supposed to be a NATO ally. It's quite shocking to see that. But it could happen, and it could be worse. But it says there in Psalm 83 that Assyria is with them, which is Ashur. And we understand, in one sense, geographically, that may be Iraq. But the people of that land have migrated up into Europe, and we're talking about maybe the Central Europeans, the Germans. And we don't see that togetherness on this. However, there has been a lot of togetherness in the past where Germany has been in common cause with a lot of the Palestinians there. And we could see that again. Just don't know where that's going to go. But that could change very rapidly. Things could change very rapidly to where you would see that. But then the third thing I mentioned, number 3 on that, was a powerful Europe with an ascendant church and a subject USA and Britain. Now, what are we talking about there? Well, certainly, we're waiting for a revival of United Europe. We're waiting for a revival of the Roman Empire, as we're told in various prophecies throughout the Bible. We have a booklet on that. The Final Superpower talks about Europe coming up into great power, and it's going to be allied with its leading Roman church. That is going to be a dominant force. And also, we read about that in Revelation 17 and 18, which is both a religious system and a commercial system. And this commercial Babylon of the end time is also called Tyre, which was an ancient commercial system, back in Ezekiel 27. But the thing I want to note about Ezekiel 27 is that it says in Ezekiel 27 that Judah and Israel were your traders. They're part of that system. And they have been, in a sense, part of the world economic system, but I think they'll be integrated even more into a European-led system. We'll see how that goes, but these are things that we wait for. And at a certain point, the Bible also talks about how Israel and Judah were very, very reliant on their, quote, lovers, meaning their international allies, and how we look to all these people to help us and save us, and then they turn on us. That's what happened in the past. And that's what is going to happen again, as we're repeatedly warned of in the scriptures. So we looking ahead for that to happen. Another thing the fourth thing I mentioned was an agreement between Europe and Israel. I do want you to look over at that real quick, because this is what I wanted to focus on, 2 things here. In Daniel 11, it mentions that, and I'm not going to go through the whole account here, but it's basically talking about this evil end-time ruler in verses 21 through 31. In one sense, it was talking about the ancient ruler Antiochus Epiphanes at the time of a conflict between the Syrians and the Egypts fighting over the land of Israel and other squabbles between them. But it comes down to a final ruler there who was sort of presaged by this man, Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a type of the end-time ruler. And that ancient ruler and the end-time ruler, it says, would make some kind of a league or agreement with God's people, with the people there in the land. And then he would break the agreement. It says he would, when the league is broken, then there's a whole thing that leads up to the abomination of desolation. And Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation set up, which Daniel spoke about, then those who are here need to flee, because it's time. Then you're right at the end. So that is going to be in some sense repeated. We don't know exactly how or in what form, but it does seem like it's going to be repeated. And if you look over at Daniel 9, just a few chapters back, where it's talking about the 70 weeks prophecy, it says, as it's going through the end of that, it says in verse 27, he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Who is that? Well, and sometimes we thought maybe it's the Messiah, but it's talking about the people of the prince who is to come in verse 26 is going to destroy the city. Well, that was the Roman leader. And there's also, as we explained in the Bible reading program commentary, there's another possibility that this could be a reference to the beast power, confirming a 7-year agreement. And in the middle of the week, it says that there's going to be an end to sacrifice and offering. Well, there's various scriptures here which show that 3.5 years before Christ's return, there's going to be a cutting off of sacrifices and offerings. And we read that in Daniel 12, if you look over there really quick. That brings us to the next item here, which is that the temple worship has to be reinstituted. And that's the big thing to look for, by the way. We have not seen that yet. In Daniel 12, he's actually told at the end of the account here that in verse 11, he says, well, it says right before that, many of the wicked will do wickedly in verse 10, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. They'll understand what? Verse 11, from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there'll be 1,290 days. And if you look at verse 13, it shows at the end of the days is when Daniel will arise to his inheritance. So in other words, that is going to be basically 3.5 years and 1 month is going to be how long from the cutting off of those sacrifices until the return of Christ at the resurrection. So we have a time frame. We're not to that time frame yet, but we need to see a reestablishment of the sacrifices before they would be cut off. So we haven't seen that yet. We will see that at some point. It's going to happen. How long is it going to be? I don't know. But there may be something to this 7-year agreement where if there's some kind of a deal made with Europe, and then Israel is able to reinstitute its sacrifices. You know, I've had 2 ideas about how this could happen, that Israel would reinstitute sacrifices. One is that they would be desperate. They would think, we're going to die anyway, we might as well just get this going and get God to save us. And so they may just do it, okay? So that would be one. But a second possibility is empowerment. In other words, that they are empowered to have control there for a while, maybe by the European power, that lets them do this for a while before coming in and putting a stop to it. I don't know. We'll see. But we do know, and this is the 6th point, is this conflict between south and the north that we see in Daniel 11, verse 40, where it says at the time of the end, the king of the south rams against the king of the north, and he counterattacks and occupies the Middle East. Well, that has not yet happened, obviously. And then it says that they invade the glorious land and take over. So we're waiting for that. We're waiting for this conflict between north and south that leads to the occupation by the beast power of all of probably the Middle East and North Africa there. And then they're going to take over Israel, but they'll probably already be there, is my guess. They just won't have, brought their forces in and taken control. And at that time, they're going to turn. They're going to break the agreement, apparently, with the Jews, and they are going to they're going to cut off sacrifices. They're going to set up the abomination of desolation, and that will then be 3.5 years before. Turn over to 1 Thessalonians 5, and I'll end with this. But while you're turning there, I want to make one more mention. The other 2 things are, one of the things I mentioned is here. And it's a period of peace and prosperity at the end time that we're going to see. 1 Thessalonians, if I did say Timothy, sorry about that. 1 Thessalonians, and this is chapter 5 and verse 1, it says, but concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write to you, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. It's going to look like peace, but it won't be peace. It's going to be sudden destruction. And so that was my 7th point, was there's going to be a period where it looks like peace has come, and maybe the European beast power will have brought that. I don't know. We'll see how it works out. And then the final 8th point I'll just mention is an alignment of Eastern nations. An alignment of Eastern nations, the kings of the East. Ezekiel 38 and 39 talks about this massive Eurasian alliance that will exist in the end time that attacks after Christ's return, but they must exist before that. Well, those people are in an alliance. They're together today. Russia, China, Iran, all these people that are mentioned there, they're all in one big alliance today. And India is even part of that, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. These things are coming together, and the end is swiftly approaching. So, brethren, what should we do as we see these things happening? Well, what I want you to note here is what else is mentioned in 1 Thessalonians 5. If you continue in chapter 4, it says, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. You are all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night or of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But let us who are of the day be sober, and putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation. For God did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. So, brethren, there's the key. We are to watch, and we are to be living in accordance with faith and obedience and trust. These are the things we're told to do. It goes along with what Christ said over in Luke 21:36, where he said, watch and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that are coming to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. And one final verse, I actually will have you look at this one, because it's a very powerful verse, and it's 1 Peter 4. 1 Peter 4. 1 Peter 4 and verse 7. This is what we should take to heart here, brethren. It says, but the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be serious and watchful in your prayers. Or as it says in the Contemporary English Version, everything will soon come to an end. So be serious and be sensible enough to pray. We need to be praying. We need to be watching. We need to be asking God to help us. In closing, brethren, we need to be discerning the signs of the times. Things are happening quickly. While the end cannot come tomorrow, indications are that it will come very soon. We are at the brink of unbelievable destruction and chaos that will, thankfully, give way to awesome joy and peace under the reign of Jesus Christ and his followers who continue in his way. May we be among them.